and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. It's not as cold as it was the last couple of weeks. We're not open house, so that's nice. So this is our first of the hopefully many monthly events titled Faculty Corner. And these monthly events are part of our weekly series, which is the career professional development workshops and seminars and panels that hopefully all of you are getting notices about. If not, please let Maggie or Catherine know if you're not on the mailing list, so we make sure you're on the mailing list. And the idea is to kind of help our PhDs and postdocs and prep and med prep and all the trainees that come under the purview of the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, help plan for your career and use the professional skills that you are learning doing activities with us or outside to better suit yourself for whatever that is what you want to do and be successful in the lab also. So I'm happy to introduce our new Faculty Corner series in which we will be showcasing one awesome University of Michigan faculty member who will be discussing with a student or a postdoc on their career paths, how they ended up being a faculty, and what their path kind of, from their training to where they are right now, and what were the challenges and how they overcame that, and what are the joys in being a faculty. So I'm not going to steal the show from Taylor and Pat because it's their show. And I would encourage you guys to Taylor will give you some cues as to when questions, it'll be open to questions to the audience, so just pay attention to that. And lastly, but not least, and most important, everybody make sure you sign in and grab this survey, which is very, very important for our mission here in that we want to know what you found most useful in this series. I know it's the first, but what you want to hear more of in the future. And if you have recommendations of faculty members who you think would be ideal to be showcased here, that would be great. And also if you want to be a moderator like Taylor, please let us know. Okay? It's all honing your professional skills while you're doing that. So thank you for coming, and thank you, Taylor and Pat. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, first I want to start off by thanking the organizers for putting together this event. So this is a really cool series. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pat Schloss, and we're going to talk a lot today about his career development and how he got where he was. So we're going to start off with an introduction of some fun facts. And first of all, what you guys need to know is Dr. Schloss has 9 children. 9, and that number was correct. 6 boys and 3 girls, aging 4 months to 16 years in age. And another fun fact, he actually lives on a farm in Dexter with many farm animals. There are some really great pictures online. I encourage you guys to visit the Facebook site. So can you tell us a little bit about your career path and how you got where you are today?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here. It was a great honor to be asked. So waiting for those awesome professors to come talk next time, maybe. I grew up in Columbia, Missouri, which is right in the middle of the state of Missouri. So love the Midwest, and which I consider Missouri to be part of the Midwest. But I started out at a small liberal arts school in St. Louis on a golf scholarship of all things, Lindenwood College, and my family moved east to Pennsylvania. Both of my parents are academics, so I promised my kids not to give this curse to them, but kind of every rung in the tenure track or administrative track, we moved. So we kind of moved like every 4 years, which just sucked. So I call myself an academic brat, kind of like an army brat, but the academics. And so when they moved east, I saw it as an opportunity to move with them. When I was at that small liberal arts school, faculty were like actively discouraged from doing research. And so it was primarily a teaching mission with no research. And so I ended up going to Cornell University in upstate New York, where I majored in agricultural and biological engineering, and ended up staying there for my PhD, which Taylor did as well at here, which everyone said was like the kiss of death for an academic career, and oh well, so it goes. And then I did my postdoc in Joe Handelsman's lab at the University of Wisconsin, and so it kind of, I think looking back at kind of like the string of time, it looks linear, but it wasn't. And there's a lot of things where if you'd have said to 18-year-old Pat Schloss, like, in 23 years you'll be a professor at the University of Michigan in the medical school, I'd be like, no way. It just wasn't even kind of in the cards of realm of
So since your parents were academics, were you very strongly, I'm never going down that route, or how did?
No, I mean, it's weird because so maybe you all appreciate this, that like, how many of you were pre-med as undergrads? Okay, and the rest of you are probably lying, right? So like, there's this sense that if you're a smart kid from a good family, or I mean, from any family, a smart kid, you'll either be a lawyer or you'll be a physician. Right? That's just what smart people do. And somehow, even though both my parents were PhDs, that was kind of the idea. And so I was going to be, my dad hated lawyers, so that was not allowed. And so I was going to be a physician, and pre-med was kind of my route to Cornell. My grades weren't the best. I would not have gotten in, I don't think I would have gotten into PIVs. That's honest. You guys are so much better than I ever was. So I did an REU experience at the University of Minnesota after my junior year of college. And that just like crystallized for me how much I loved research. It was in a chemical engineering lab, and they gave me my own project, and I just fell in love with research. And that converted me from pre-med to what I now call like pre-PhD, where I wanted to think of things more from like, as an engineering curriculum, where there's a lot of like rules of thumb for how to design things and size different parts. And it's kind of wanting to take a more scientific approach to thinking about engineering. And so that's kind of how I made that switch. But so they were happy then that I'd become a PhD, but yeah.
And when you were on the PhD route, was it always focused on professor from there, or had you considered?
Yeah, I think it was. And again, I think we also kind of fall into this trap as PhDs that like, if you're a good PhD, you become a professor, which is not true, right? I don't know that I was a particularly good PhD and became a professor, and there's I've had awesome postdocs who go into industry, and they'll be awesome in industry, right? So you've got to be awesome no matter what, right? And like the tenure track career path is unique and very different, I think, from anything else, which is part of the reason I love being a professor. And my parents, of course, were quite happy that, I mean, ultimately, whatever I did, they were happy, but they were stoked that I wound up here eventually. So.
Yeah. So can you describe for us what your typical week looks like?
Yeah, so as I've kind of gone through tenure track, some of the things I wish I would have realized early was that I really have control over my own schedule. When I was talking to a previous postdoc this morning on Slack about this, actually, that like he appreciates like how much time it takes to answer emails. So for example, and I said, the biggest thing I've learned is to schedule time to do emails rather than to just do emails, right? So like, there is no email, well, there's like maybe one or two, that are so important that they have to be responded to immediately, right? So what I do is I block off an hour every morning to do emails, and I hate it. I mean, it's like the worst hour of my life. But it then keeps me from like constantly putting out fires, and so that's kind of like an administrative thing. And then our department has seminars, and those kind of things are blocked out on my calendar. I try to, so I got a PhD because I like doing research. I became a professor because I like research. So the idea of becoming kind of like a grant administrator or project administrator is not what I want to do. I want to have like my own active research questions. So I do a lot of bioinformatics research on my own. And so I try to block off a couple hours every afternoon to do my own thing. And that's kind of for my own sanity, where I've got like something that I'm fully invested in, that like, so when like I'm the first author on those papers, like I'm the first author, I did the work, I wrote the work, you know, like it's me. But then like there's always meetings that come up, and I meet with trainees frequently. We've got lab meetings every week. So there's those types of things, but I've tried to take a much more active role. Like, this is my calendar. This isn't someone else's calendar to control.
So, and with the whole 9 kids in the farm,
Yeah.
how do you integrate the work-life balance?
Yeah, so believe it or not, the farm is a work-life balance tool of sorts. So, I mean, it's more than that, of course, but like, so we have 9 kids. My wife, thankfully, with that many kids, is able to work from home with the kids, of course. And when I moved here, I was previously at UMass Amherst, and we lived in town where we had ready, high-speed internet access wherever we were. So my laptop was like always on my lap. And my wife kind of absolved me by saying, well, you've got to do this to get tenure, right? I was kind of like, probably not, I don't know. It's kind of crazy. So when we moved here, it was like in 2006 when the economy kind of crapped out in Michigan, and we found a foreclosure in Dexter on 10 acres. And after mowing a lot of that every weekend, kind of got to the point where like, this is stupid. Let's get some animals to do the mowing for me. So we got sheep. But then also it's, with a bunch of kids, or with any kids, you kind of had to think about what kind of life do we want as a family. And so for us, it's important that like every night we eat dinner together as a family. We're not kind of parenting by minivan, we're kind of running from activity to activity, which is really easy to fall into. It's kind of like almost expected, I think, of a lot of parents. So we have this farm, and like my daughter Mary, who's 16, is in charge of the sheep. Patrick, who's 14, is in charge of the pigs. Joe's 12, has his own cattle herd. Everybody helps with eggs. I mean, it's like they all have they might not be in like Scouts or Little League or whatever, but they have their own little enterprise. And I'm waiting for my 12-year-old to buy me out because he wants more cows and does not like my sheep. So the thing about having the farm, so I would hope that I do this because I love my kids, but the thing about having the farm is like there are chores that have to be done every morning and every night, and I'm the only one that I'll allow to drive the skid steer. So this morning before I came into work, I had to put a big bale that's like 1,200 pounds into a feeder for my 12-year-old's cows, right? I have to do that, right? So I have to be here, right? I have to be present in the morning and at night. And so that limits the amount I can travel, which I think is a good thing. But it turns out to be kind of a work life, or if you want, like a work balance thing that has to be done, because if I don't do it, then like others suffer. And I'm not suggesting that everyone go out and get a farm for work-life balance, but like find that thing that you love doing. And that, like the other thing that the farm gives me is like an identity outside of being a professor, which is nice, because like professors are weird people and don't always have the best social skills, right? So there's like people I interact with on a daily basis out in Dexter that I don't know if they know I'm a professor or not, and I kind of like it that way, right? And they kind of know me as, the vet, as the woman microbiologist knows me as the weird sheep farmer that doesn't know what antibiotics give the sheep, right? Or is maybe overdosing his sheep, right? Or is doing crazy things. So I like that, right? That there's this world I can go into where I'm not expected to be like Professor Schloss. Not that people expect that in here either, but it's nice to kind of have that alter ego.
And do you ever want to experiment on your farm animals, or do you want to keep those two things?
I do. So like, again, the farm was so I don't have to think about work constantly, right? So I get home at 5:30, 6, and it's like chores, dinners, kids, like I go to bed at 9:30. I don't know how people have time to watch like TV, honestly. But like, yeah, so I got the farm so I don't have to think about sheep. And so they're out on pasture, some of them are in the barn now, and ready to like walk around kind of kicking manure as I'm going through. And I study gut microbiota, where we sequence human manure, basically, or sheep pellets. And so I do. It's like, so I've had these ideas of doing like a longitudinal time course of the sheep microbiome, but I haven't. Well, I guess my lab's here, so now they know. But I keep putting that off because I think there's a lot of really cool agricultural questions. So like I have sheep that are developing ketosis because they're not getting enough energy because they're pregnant, right? And so is that a microbiome thing, right? And is there, what's the role there? And I really don't want to go that path because I like having this balance, but.
So could you speak a little bit about how the evolution of your work-life balance happened in terms of like when you were a graduate student and a postdoc? Did you learn things, or were you always able to keep this in perspective?
Oh no, yeah, it wasn't until we got here, like 8 years ago, that happened, and it was always like go, and I would, and nobody told me to, right? Like it wasn't like somebody said, you need to be here on Saturdays and Sundays. Like I was there, And part of it was because I loved it and it was fun. And we would talk about Sunday projects, which is like, I don't know, maybe, I mean, you might have this too, where it's like it's a project you do on Sunday afternoons when no one's around, you don't tell the PI, unless it works. And then if it works, then it's like, awesome. And so like, we did that. I mean, I did that and it was fun. It was kind of part of the culture. And I mean, I won't deny that probably helped me move things along, but it probably wasn't like the best thing for my family. And so it wasn't until we got to Michigan where I just kind of said like, okay, I'm like, however old I am, you know, early 30s, if I keep doing this for the next 30 years, it's gonna be brutal. And I remember I would go on 1 or 2 trips a year, 1 or 2 trips a month to give a talk on the microbiome. And I remember sitting on a plane thinking like, this is so stupid. I've given the same talk like maybe 20 times this year or whatever. In 20 years, no one is gonna remember what I say here, right? Yet, if I'm home with my kids, then I hope that like they'll tell their kids or they'll remember me, you know, the fun times we had at, you know, spending a week at, you know, the fairgrounds in Saline for 4-H, or, you know, feeding the cow at 7 in the morning, or things like that. And thinking like, who's more important, that my kids have these memories, or that some random person, I don't know, forgets my talk, right? You can read the paper if you want to know what I did, right? But my kids can't do that. So that was kind of a revelation for me.
That's awesome. And then does that influence how you, they're sitting here, so,
Yeah.
advise your trainees in terms of the work-life balance?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, you could ask them, but like I don't tell them like hours. I think I put more expectation on like the quality of work than the quantity of work, and push people to think hard about what they're doing and not just do what everyone else does. And like I made some comment on Twitter about something about working on Saturdays, and another PI student shot back like, "We haven't seen you on a Saturday in a while." I was like, "Good point." So I try not to push that stuff really hard, but at the same time, because I've had my own experience of like working every Saturday as a grad student postdoc, it's hard for me to be like, don't work weekends or don't work crazy hours, because as much as people on social media like to talk about work hours, I don't think anyone wants to do like that study where we take a cohort and split them in half, and half of you work 40 hours and half of you work however many hours you want, and see where you're at in 20 years, right? Like, you're gonna bust your ass and do what you can do, right? I mean, like and I can't tell you not to do that, but also if you've got like a family, it's gonna hurt, right? And if you've got a family and both spouses are working, it's really gonna hurt, right? So I've been very lucky because my wife got a master's degree and then stayed home with the kids, so I can kind of do what I wanted to do without having to worry about childcare and things like that. But most people nowadays don't have that luxury.
So what skills from your training, besides kind of learning the ins and outs of work-life balance, do you think were invaluable to what you do day to day as a professor now?
So my postdoc I did in Joe Handelsman's lab at the University of Wisconsin was amazing. So I went there because she was developing this technique of cloning DNA from uncultured bacteria from soil into E. coli and other culturable hosts. So like 99% of bacteria in soil have we aren't able to culture them readily. So there's this treasure trove of genetic resources and potentially biotechnological material there to exploit. So I went there to learn how to do that. And I got that, but I also learned a lot about mentoring from her. She had received a HHMI professorship centered around scientific education, which talked about mentoring and classroom teaching. The idea that we're scientists, and when we go into the classroom, we are still scientists. And we should teach people science the way we do science. We should experiment like we're scientists. And so that's really shaped a lot about how I mentor and teach. This past summer, I was named to be the chair of the journals board for the American Society for Microbiology. And I want to approach that in a scientific way. And so Ada Hagen, who's a recent graduate of PIBS, is going to be a postdoc in my lab studying the science of journal publishing. Right? And so I went there to learn this technique that I know I don't use at this point. But those other things about teaching and mentoring and, you know, how to care and relate to students in postdocs was invaluable.
It's awesome. And so is there something that, you know, in hindsight, looking back, you wish you had picked up from your training that would have been really valuable and very helpful as a faculty member?
Yeah, so like proposal writing is one of those things that's really hard. And one of the things about mentoring is that you can't just have one mentor, I don't think, because you're a multifaceted individual that has a lot of different values and interests and goals and everything. And there's going to be mentors that are going to be kind of like that tough aunt or uncle who kind of ride you kind of hard. And then there's going to be people that are like cheerleaders. And I've had good luck at having mentors that were cheerleaders. So I never had anybody that looked at a proposal of mine and been like, Pat, this is like crap. Don't submit this. Like, so it's like a postdoc. I submitted a NSF grant proposal for like $1 million, which is not how NSF rolls at all. Especially they're not going to give that money to a postdoc. But I didn't have anyone tell me that that was a stupid idea and waste of my time. And I never had anybody like really critically read a grant proposal. So that part I felt was lacking. Another challenge I faced was I was trained as an engineer all the way through, and engineers think about things different than biologists. And so I was interviewing for what at the time was my dream job at a little place up the road in Lansing. And Rich Lenski, who's amazing, at the end of my chalk talk was like, so Pat, like, what's your hypothesis? I was like, I mean, what are you talking about? I just like showed you like 5 hypotheses in 5 different stories that we're able to test because of like my unique background. He's like, no, like, what's your hypothesis? And I didn't understand at the time, but like biologists have this like hypothesis that they're going to spend the rest of their lives devoted to like taking apart and studying, you know, kind of spinning further and further down or looking from different directions. I never got that training, that mindset, and I kind of do now, but it's still like hard. So kind of getting that mindset of like, this is the problem I'm going to devote the rest of my life to. Whereas like an engineer would be like, well, I solved that problem, right? Like, I mean, it's like, it's kind of like I was studying waste degradation, like food waste degradation in grad school. And so it's like, can we degrade this food waste? Yes. Okay, great. Next problem. And that was kind of how we rolled. Versus, well, why can we degrade it? And what about the food? And what can we, you know, like, and on and on and on. So that was something that I wish I would have gotten a little bit better, but I don't know. I've slowly picked it.
So, can you speak a little bit to now, how do you seek out those, or do you, critics versus cheerleader mentors, and how would you advise that to students that might only have a critic mentor or a cheerleader mentor?
Yeah, so it never gets easy, I don't think. So you'd look at me and say, you've got tenure, you're a full professor, you're an endowed chair, like, you got it made, right? And it's kind of nice to have these benchmarks, right? Like to have, like in microbiology and immunology, we have like 2 checkpoints before you're a candidate, and then you've got to defend, right? And you've got committee meetings, and there's all these steps, and even along the tenure track, there's steps, and there's people that are like on the other side of that step that can kind of help pull you up, right? That there's other grad students that can tell you that you're awesome, or that can like critique what you're doing. Well, I'm kind of at a point now where like, next step emeritus. Right? And like, what does that like? And they're all in Florida. They're not here to help me out, right? So I mean, that's kind of very particular to a full professor, I think, that I've kind of appreciated in the last few months. But it's hard, and then really, like, we want the cheerleaders, right? Like, like I get like this endorphin rush whenever somebody likes a post of mine on Twitter or hits the retweet or invites me to do something like this. But, you know, to find someone that's going to like challenge me or, you know, someone says, well, have you thought of it this way? Or when you get the reviewer comments back, like I can't look at reviewer comments. I can't. So like Matt Doherty, a former postdoc in my lab, is a paper that we got reviews back, and I still haven't looked at the reviews, even though like the paper's accepted in principle. Like just because like, I will, don't worry. But like, it's hard because you don't want that negative pushback, but it is important. And I think also thinking about mentors that serve like a particular use, right? Like I mean, I think I'm of limited use for mentoring, say, like women or minorities in grad school because we're first generation college students. So I couldn't mentor on research, but like on the experiences of like how to deal with parents that don't understand where you're going, right? Or dealing with sexism in the academy, like, and that's not in my toolbox, right? I understand it, I know it, but I couldn't tell you how to deal with it, right? I can maybe tell people about work-life balance to some weird degree. A lot of people have asked me about how do you have a farm when you're an assistant professor, which is probably, you know, get a couple chickens and stop, right? But it's hard, and there's no, I think the idea that you'd have one mentor for one thing is not quite right. And I think, to their credit, a lot of progressive departments like my own set up mentoring committees for new faculty. And so when I came here, I got a mentoring committee, like 2 people. And that was nice and all, but to have a mentor assigned to you is very different than picking your own mentor, right? And so I've had mentors assigned to me that, I mean, they're great people and all, but I don't relate to them very well. Right? And so that's something to think about too.
So kind of in this vein of some of the challenges with being a professor, what would you say are the top 2 challenges that you faced on the whole tenure track journey, and then how have you overcome those?
Yeah, so I guess the challenges, the big challenges are, I mean, without lying to you, it's money, right? Like, how do I get money to keep this ship going, right? Like, I've got, I think, 8 people in my lab right now, and I've got to keep them paid, right? And that's my biggest fear, and your PI's, I'm sure your PI's biggest fear is like money drying up and having to lay people off. That just sucks, right? That's worse than getting scooped by far. So how do you deal with that? You gotta be persistent. I think I submitted my first grant proposal 9 or 10 times to different agencies. The funding rate was about 12%. So that kind of works, right? So, I mean, but even like last year, I had a proposal that was scored at the 13th percentile at NIH and was rejected because the pay line was at 10%. So, resubmit, and it's at like the 3 percentile. So it's like, awesome, right? So you've got to be persistent. You've got to, I mean, I think you have to be a good scientist and think uniquely and hard about problems. But the funding is hard. And the other thing is like a personal thing that even though you may look at me and be like, oh, Pat has it made, I still need that like ego boost, right? Like there's still this like imposter syndrome type thing where I worry about like the next 5 years and whether what I'm doing now is good enough for 5 years from now and how we're going to change things for 5 years, right? So through happenstance, I'm not a virologist, but I've had 3 postdocs in my lab now that are virologists by training, right? I know very little about virology, which is kind of scary because how am I going to mentor them or like design projects? But I need them to like move me along to kind of the next thing, right? So that imposter syndrome where you never quite feel like you're good enough or that this ship is going to sink is always kind of there. But at the same time, like, I'm the captain of the ship, right? Like, I get to, like, drive that ship, and if it fails, oh, well, I mean, it was a good cruise. Whereas, like, I mean, I interviewed for a job at Monsanto, actually while I was already an assistant professor at UMass. And it was all the resources you'd ever want, and they wanted me to do kind of discovery in microbes using that technique I learned in Joe Handelsman's lab. And I kind of in the back of my head was like, well, if this doesn't work, what's Monsanto going to do with me, right? Whereas if it didn't work, then I would write a different grant proposal, right, as a PI. And so that's pretty cool too.
So I think some of us might be wondering, after reading your blog post, how you maintain such positivity like you have in the face of a lot of the negativity that surrounds academia. So do you have a particular secret, like a mind place that you go to do that?
The farm and the kids. Yeah. I mean, it's like, so the other thing about the farm, and I think I was talking with somebody earlier in the week about like they do crocheting or craft work, is that I can eat like a lamb chop tonight for dinner and be like, that was a good lamb. I did well. right? Versus if you've ever submitted a paper or grant proposal, you probably know where all the flaws are in those papers or proposals, right? You can predict what the reviewer is going to say. You know what the next steps are to close those holes, right? Whereas like that's good land, right? So to have that kind of objective thing that's good is nice. Also knowing that I can go home and the reviewers might think I'm an idiot. At least one kid's not going to think I'm an idiot. So that's nice. But I mean, I think also, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Like, we go through these valleys of just like despair. Just kind of thinking like, damn, 13th percentile. Why isn't that funded? Right?
Yeah.
Like, this just sucks. Don't you want to cure cancer? I mean, come on. This is why we haven't cured cancer. But if you sit there forever, you're pretty horrible to be around, and I don't know, it just like eats you, and it's not always sunshine. And I think people in my lab know Grumpy Pat. There's evidently a nice Pat Schloss handle on Twitter, but I don't know who's maintaining that nowadays. But I'll go through ruts.
Definitely nobody in the lab though.
I'm sure there's somebody. It gets handed down through the generations, but I think that's at Gentle Pat on the back.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody can follow that one.
That's right.
So you've talked a little bit about how you made this pretty big move, pretty much across the country.
Yeah.
What was the motivating factor behind that decision?
So it's complicated. I mean, it's complicated, right? So I was at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst for 3 years, and my intention was to be there forever. I did not want to be my parents moving every step of the ladder. But after being there for 3 years, I kind of started to notice things that on like a professional level and personal level. So like on a personal level, I started noticing that people thought Amherst, which is about an hour and a half west of Boston, people thought Amherst was the Midwest. I'm like, it's east of New York City, actually. This is not the Midwest. That there's just like a different culture. I was in Madison where it's a lot like Ann Arbor, where like football is king, and like, you know, churches would have to remind people that like a Brett Favre jersey was not appropriate church attire. You know, like this was like, these were my people. And like, remember like the Patriots are in the playoffs, and I could get a pizza at kickoff in 15 minutes, which would never happen right anywhere else. I mean, that's just like a little thing. Or I would ask a colleague like, hey, do you want to go out for lunch? And they'd be like, to talk about what? It's like, I mean, like, I don't know, like, to get to know you. And so it's just a weird culture, and growing up and living in the Midwest for so long, we missed that, kind of those bonds. At like a professional level, this was when kind of the microbiome field was really taking off, and I developed software to do a lot of analysis in that area, and I was invited to go to a study section at NIH for the Human Microbiome Project, where they were trying to pick projects to demonstrate the value of the human microbiome. And so all of the proposals had big flaws, right, to one degree or another, and you needed like an epidemiologist, a microbiologist, clinician, some ecology folks, maybe an engineer for like new technology. So, you know, there's like 5 or 6 critical pieces to these proposals, and I was like, you know, the other thing I noticed is that I wasn't a PI or co-I on any of these proposals. And where I am now, like, there isn't a team. There weren't people to make that team, right? And so I think on the flight home, I looked at the back of Science magazine where they had the jobs back paper days. And University of Michigan was recruiting a cluster hire where they wanted to hire people in microbiology, ecology, molecular biology, and ecology. So I was like, wow, like if we'd have had those recruits write these proposals, it'd be perfect. And then also like engineering and public health were involved. I think maybe the 4th position was public health. And so I applied for that job. And I called Vince Young, who's a colleague here now, and said, hey, so about this job. He's like, oh, you saw that, did you? Like, it just sounds a lot like Pat Schloss written all over. He's like, really? So that was kind of like the positive reason to come here. It's just that it was like a job that was like written for me. And I don't know if it was literally written for me, but it felt like it. But it was a risk because the dean at UMass was like, what do you want, Pat? Like, we'll hire people to make you fit in better. And I'm sure I could have said like tenure. Like, you know, they wanted to give me everything. And I was like, no, we're not going to play that game. Like, I've made my decision. We're going to leave. And so the risk in coming here was that I don't know if I'm going to get tenure, right? And where it's probably slam dunk at UMass, Michigan had different standards. I had to kind of reestablish myself here. So of course everything worked out, but those are kind of the risks, and we love it here. And I was recruited to go somewhere else a few years ago, and my wife wouldn't even get on a plane to go visit the place. I'm like, they're like throwing money at me. And I don't care. So I was like, it's gonna be like 2 hours from your family. I don't care. It's like, we love Michigan. So we're stuck with me.
In the context of making big decisions like that, is there any advice that you would give students or postdocs in terms of how they kind of navigate that situation, or what you might do in order to figure out what's best?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of those things are, there's a lot of variables at play, and I think you have to figure out which of those variables are most important to you. So like, money was never really the issue anywhere, but like quality of life was important, and then thinking about resources. Like, I could go to this other school that's trying to build what Michigan has, and I could be the head of that initiative, or I could kind of like be a very valuable piece of that machine here, right? And keep my family really happy, right? So that's where you have those different values, that finding mentors that share those values in those different areas, and people you respect is really important. And then there are people at UMass, when I describe a couple situations, they're like, oh, you gotta go. Like, just go. Like, don't even think about it anymore. So that was valuable, because I think, at least I always kind of have self-doubts about where I'm doing or where I'm going, and sort of have other people be like, no, you're doing a good job, or you're on the ball here.
Right.
It's nice.
So we've got a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to you guys if you guys have any questions. So the last couple that we want to hit is, how would you describe your advising / mentorship style?
Yeah. So I'll just say that when I interview postdoc candidates, I like leave the room for an hour and let the truth come out. So I'll give you my version of that, but you can ask them. There's two kind of role models or ideas that stuck with me. So the first, again, is from Jo Handelsman, who placed a priority on her trainees and trainees in general. And so Jo was here a couple years ago, so this won't work, but when you're off developing your own labs, if you want Jo Handelsman to come and talk, don't invite her, get your trainees to invite her. She cannot say no to trainees. Right? So that's how we got her to come to Michigan a couple years ago. And so that idea is valuable. And hopefully my trainees will tell you that if they want to meet with me, I meet right, in a timely manner in like a day or two. And in the past, like, there's been a trip that I needed to go to, and my wife was like, well, the trainees invited you? I was like, yeah. She's like, well, you have to go then, right? Like, that's what Jo would say. So, okay, yeah, to go. So that's like a big thing, to kind of try to put trainees first as much as possible. That's the reason we're at a university, right? Our trainees. Right? This would be a research institute if it weren't for grad students and postdocs. The other was a woman named Katrina Edwards, who sadly passed away very young a few years ago at USC. But when I visited her, she had this idea of benign neglect, which is hopefully not as bad as it sounds now saying it. But the idea that, I mean, you can be there for people, but at the same time kind of leave them to do their own thing.
Right.
And so there's they'll tell you that I think there are very particular ways that I want things done. Ways we write papers and kind of methods we use and things like that. But I give people a lot of latitude to do things. And so in the past, that's like led to projects that don't go very far because that person isn't going to push it hard or whatever. But I try to give people, I tell people that we've got a sandbox that we play in. We study C. difficile infections and colon cancer and microbiome. Okay, so that's our sandbox. Go play, right? Like, and thankfully we have funding that I could say that. But and if it was like way out there, then I thought, I'm not into that.
Someday.
So yeah, can you write your own proposal? Sounds like you're ready to be a PI, right? So
So what do you think is the most rewarding aspect, if you had to pick one, of being a professor?
So it's honestly been like seeing people do well, and seeing people, so like, so I've got a number of, not a large number, but several former grad students and postdocs that are doing great things. So like, Alex Schubert has a position at the FDA. She graduated a few years ago and loves it. And Joe Zacular is at Vanderbilt and is kind of going on the search train right now. And, Tao Ding is a former postdoc who's getting a job back in China as a faculty. So like, seeing them do well is important. I still don't, like going back to that sitting on that plane, like I don't know that anyone's going to care what I do in like 50 years, right? But hopefully people will care. I mean, hopefully Joe and Alex and Tao and people in the lab and everyone else will appreciate kind of working with me and kind of seeing science as kind of a tool for working with people. Of course, we want to use science to like improve life, but at the same time, like, I mean, there's like 8 people in my lab that I can improve their lives now and help them kind of develop and things like that. And I think I said in this blog post, like, y'all are, as like an old person now, you're in a very cool time in life where people tend to form these like lifelong relationships in their early 20s or mid 20s and start to form families and things like that. And that's just kind of like, you're an adult, right? And you've been an adult for a while, but like, you're really on your own. It's like you're making car payments and paying rent and all these things that, you kind of did as an undergrad, and perhaps, you're one of those amazing people that has been doing it for a long time, but like, it's just kind of a cool time of life for people, and it's a part of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So our last question is, if you had one piece of advice to leave everybody with, what would that be?
So I'm going to stick to the science on this. So it would probably be, don't be your advisor. I think sometimes faculty fall into the trap that we try to make clones of ourselves because it worked for us, right? And you might say, oh, I'm going to do what Pat did, and I would not encourage that. I mean, but like we don't need another Pat Schloss. Right? Like we need someone that takes what I'm doing and then adds to it. Like we need like virologists that are interested in the microbiome that are going to do something. We need people that are interested in archaea and methane processing that are interested in the role of archaea in the gut microbiome, right? And so we need those people that kind of move the science forward, not just clone of their PI. And so then shape your training that way, right? Like I think for better or worse about PIBs, like there's this like core curriculum you have to take, and by the time you're through with it, you're sick of taking classes. And so then I tell people like, hey, why don't you get this certificate in like data science or bioinformatics? And it's like, oh yeah. I'm going to see how many classes more they're going to have to take. I'm like, oh, kill me. I'm going to rather be in the lab, right? And there's a lot of these like embedded master's programs where things can be formal. Like I know we have like an MPH program in microbiology and immunology, but seek out training, not just like classroom, but research and thinking about postdocs of how to do things differently.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
If anybody else has any questions now, I want to open the floor.
How do you go about making hiring decisions?
I hate it. So one of the hardest things is getting, and like the most critical thing is like getting good people to work for you. And Michigan's wonderful because we're just being Michigan recruits a lot of great people. That like PIBS has this amazing, PIBS is an amazing program where we get students that UMass would die for. Here we say, oh, that person's going to go to like Yale, or Harvard. At UMass we'd be like, oh, that person's going to go to Michigan. I mean, not that, I think we'd kick Yale's ass, don't get me wrong. But like, we never got people at UMass like people in this room. And I hate like personnel issues. So like if I know someone's not pulling, not as much as I say I don't count hours, if I know somebody's like not pulling their weight time-wise, it's like hard for me personally to be like, so like, what are you doing around here? So that's hard, but I mean, one of the things I've struggled with as a PI is that like Caitlin Flynn, who's MIA today, coined the MAT rule, the mat phenomenon. So we had more mats in the lab than women, which I took very personally, and whatever, I don't know why that happened. But so that's kind of recruiting for diversity when you've got 8 people in a group. For me, it has been hard. We do a lot of quantitative things, and that does tend to be more male focused, but kind of how do we overcome that and deal with that? And I think through recent hires, we're kind of doing a better job, but yeah, so that hiring is painful, I find. But it's also, once I get past the point of like hiring people, they're awesome. I mean, I love having the people around, so.
To piggyback off that a little bit real quick, is personality part of the package that you look for in shaping your lab and in new hires?
Yeah, I mean, like my main criteria is that I can like talk to the person for an hour. Like I don't care what you do. I mean, like so we had an undergrad when I was at UMass, God bless him, a woman who's a programmer and still works for me is like, so what are you gonna do this weekend? And I think it may have been like Thanksgiving or something. And he just looked at her cold and was like, I cannot predict the future. And I like interviewed other people that like wanted to tell me what I'm doing wrong. And I'd be like, I mean, you could be constructive and say like, maybe it would be cool to move in this direction or something else, right? Like, I don't want to work with those people. I mean, they probably have a place and a different personality could handle that or bring them out. But I think like people in my lab have different personalities, and there's other people where their PIs have said this person's really shy, and I'm like, that's fine. I've got this other person that's really outgoing, right? And
yeah.
So.
Is there a question over there?
Can you speak a little bit about the transition to independence out of your postdoc and how you navigated that, mainly scientifically, but also from a development standpoint?
So it did feel a bit isolating because, this thing that's true that like you need to develop independence, and so part of indicating that is that you'll publish papers without your PI from your postdoc. I think what I did in terms of like bioinformatics was very distinct from what like Joe does with anything else. So I didn't care if my name was on papers with her, but she ended up writing papers with my competitor because she didn't want to like, she needed that service done, and she didn't want to like break my independence, which just kind of sucked. So there's that, but then also feeling of, well, I'm an assistant professor, I'm a faculty now, I should know how to do this stuff. And so that's hard too, and you don't have like good mentors to kind of help you get things rolling. And having things like a good startup package and things like that certainly help kind of get over those initial funding things and fears of independence. But I think most of it's affirming to yourself that you belong and you're doing great things.
All right, do we have any more questions?
Yeah.
Do you ever get jaded with science? And if you do, how do you reinvigorate yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, I do. Like there's certainly things about science that I do and don't like. So again, because I'm like an engineer, I approach things very differently. And so, no one take this the wrong way, but like I'm in a department, probably in a med school, that's like basic science, and people get excited about figuring out like what codon they did site-directed mutagenesis on to get something in vitro to do something. It's like really hard for me to get excited about that because I'm like looking at a community of bacteria and there's no like model community or model organism to do. I mean, so like to me when I like see that stuff get held up, it's like amazing. I mean, it is amazing, but like it's just kind of like, okay. I mean, like, what are we gonna do with that? As like an engineer, I'm kind of like, so what? So it's easy to get jaded about that in a way when people kind of then poo-poo what we do as like descriptive. So that descriptive versus mechanistic thing drives me nuts. And so typically what I do then is get petty. Kind of like, I see, so like people talk about microbiome stuff being descriptive. And so there was like this GWAS study no offense to people that do GWAS studies, where they had like thousands of people and people are like, this is an amazing study. I'm like, how is this GWAS study any less descriptive than what we do in microbiome literature? And no one had an answer, of course. Got a lot of likes on it, that's good. So that kind of, I mean, I'm contributing to it, right? So that pettiness in science of these different aspects and types of research is annoying. The funding climate sucks, but so I don't really have a positive way. I mean, to know kind of that we're doing good things, people like what we're doing, people say nice things about us, helps.
All right, if there are no more questions, thank you so much.
My pleasure, thank you. And I'm like just over there, a couple floors down, so if you ever want to make an appointment to talk or anything, I'm happy to.
Make sure you guys signed in before you leave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We need to sign in here again.
I'm doing a master's in bioinformatics.
Oh, you are? Cool, how's it going?